Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this third plenary of the PDF. The topic today is Innovation in Education and Teacher Policy, and I'm really delighted to be joined by a large panel of experts from across the globe. But before I introduce our panel of experts, I'd just like to do a few housekeeping rules. So first of all, I'm Freda Wolfenden. I'm a Professor of Education and International Development at the Open University in the UK. Housekeeping rules. Our online panelists, of which we have a few, are invited to keep their camera on and microphone off when they're not speaking. Online participants, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking, but when you're speaking, perhaps if you're asking a question, please put on your video and microphone. You're also invited to use the chat function. We really welcome questions at any point or comments during the plenary. English and French interpretation is available by selecting your language using the globe icon at the bottom of the screen or using the headsets if you're with us in the room. Live participants may also comment and ask questions during the Q&A session. That will follow short inputs from each of our panelists. Ushers will pass around the microphone if you want to ask a question, and we really welcome some questions. So I'm delighted today to have a large panel of experts with us. First of all, with me here in Kigali, a very warm welcome to the Honourable Claudette, a Minister of State in charge of ICT and TVET, Ministry of Education in Rwanda. Welcome. Really pleased you could join us in person. And then joining us remotely, we also have the Honourable Mr. Stanislas Ouaro, Minister of Education, Literacy and the Promotion of National Languages from Burkina Faso, Mr. Iwan Syahril, Director General of Teachers and Education Personnel from Indonesia, the Honourable Mr. Jonel Powell, Minister of Education, Youth, Sports and Culture and Chairman of the National Commission from St. Kitts and Nevis, Miss Lucy Crehan, researcher and teacher, author of Cleverlands, The Secrets Behind the Success of the World's Education Superpowers, joining us from the United Kingdom. And finally, Mr. Dennis Siniho-Olo, Senior Regional Advisor from Education International. Welcome everyone to this third plenary on innovation in education and teacher policy. Just a few words of introduction to the topic. Teacher policies have important implications for a wide range of actors at different levels and in a variety of ways in the education ecosphere. But historically, too frequently, policy making has only involved a limited number of actors and stakeholders. However, excitingly, we're now seeing innovative approaches to policy making informed by multiple stakeholders and utilizing new tools such as social media and crowdsourcing. These are enabling us to have transparent and iterative cycles of development, implementation, and evaluation of policies. In some contexts, we're seeing sustained structured social dialogue to fully inform teacher policies. And also policies need to be framed in ways which promote innovation. They need to be flexible to permit and foster variations across micro contexts to improve teaching and learning. This involves taking into consideration issues of trust, accountability, and decentralization to promote teacher agency, professional autonomy, creativity, and high standards. So in this panel, we will hear about how different geographies and countries are approaching innovative policy making and implementing policies which foster, nurture, and sustain creative solutions. So I'd like to start by turning now to the Minister for Rwanda to ask you a question. Welcome. Based on Rwanda's orientation towards building knowledge-based societies, what policy advice would you give other countries to build education systems that foster a more engaged citizenry ready to participate in an emerging knowledge economy? Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thanks for having me. First of all, I would like to say, to humbly state that Rwanda is still learning. And so what I'm going to share is not necessarily a success in Rwanda, but I'm just going to share what I think should be best practices around the globe. These are a few. We know some of these things are working in other countries and here as well. But we collectively think that these are the best practices that we should be adopting. And I'm going to probably have them in a few key points. First of all, an innovative policy towards empowering, yes, teachers when you're building towards a knowledge-based economy. I think the most important thing is how do you train your teachers? And here I'm talking about pre-service, in-service, and the continuous professional development. This is very critical because the teachers cannot give what they don't have. And we're in a world that evolves every day. And so it is very important that, for them to keep up with the trends and, to make sure that they are indeed giving the best, is that you also have to invest in them. And this is critical. The second thing that we almost don't give value to, or we just mention it passing, I think teachers cannot be motivated or be innovative or do the most and give the most of them and in a selfless way if they're not well motivated as well. In here, what am I saying? I'm talking about, what are the incentives have we put in place to make sure that their welfare is taken care of? You cannot be innovative when you're hungry. You cannot be innovative when you cannot send your children to school yourself, yet you're a teacher. There are basic things that we need to really consider to make sure that our teachers are giving their best. Here, I'm not talking only about salaries. In most countries, the teacher workforce is always, the biggest. So it takes a big chunk of the resources of the country. And so whenever it's about increasing or reducing, no one really wants to touch on that segment of the resources. But there are many ways we can be innovative. For instance, we know that the military has access to some sort of tax levies and tax reduction, products. Why don't we think around that and make sure that the teachers can as well have access to that kind of thing? How do we, some schools, I've seen this as a practice, private schools mainly, they make sure that if you are a teacher at a certain school, then your children, when they go to school, they're not paying the tuition fees. Well, how about we adopt this as countries, as nations, and make sure that, yes, for our teachers to not struggle with tuition fees, then let's make sure that this is also taken care of. And here, I'm saying this with an emphasis because I would like to make a submission to the entire congregation here. There is so much that we do when we say capacity building. When you add up all the capacity building, the trainings that we do, and everything, I think if you add up all that, our teachers would have a PhD. They would have these degrees. But if we were to really invest, on top of that, or reduce a little bit around that area, and invest in incentives that make their welfare a bit more better, I think we would have teachers that are more productive. Another point that I wanted to emphasize on is that we are in a world that I think COVID has shown us that technology is really the way to go. In most countries, when we were faced with these challenging times, we expected that teachers would just adopt these new technologies and be able to teach. But they need training. They need they need the devices. They need the content that is adopted to these new devices. I think it is about time that we collectively start looking into investing in digital literacy for our teachers, equipping them with the right kind of devices, and working with them to ensure that we produce content that speaks both to them, but also that speaks to their audience, in this case, the learners. In many countries, Rwanda included, we've seen initiatives that only look at the students, and in most cases, the teachers are left behind. It is about time that we shift the focus to teachers, because, like I said earlier, they cannot give what they don't have. We cannot expect that they would teach using these new technologies, using these new platforms, if we haven't invested in them and made sure that they are given the right tools. And the last point that I wanted to raise as well is for our teachers to keep up with the trends. And here I'll probably drive this point home for schools that are teaching TVET schools. There should be engagement with the private sector. The private sector is very key. Why? Because for our teachers to be relevant, they will need to have these continuous interactions with the private sector. For TVET particularly, if private sector is not involved, then you're sure that what you're producing will probably not be speaking to the market. And for you to be able to produce what speaks to the market is that you ensure that the teachers, or the trainers in our case, are fully immersed in the private sector, I would say, environment. And so the engagement to the private sector is very key. And last but not least, the peer learning. How many times do we bring these teachers together in sessions like these or other sessions, where they exchange best practices? How do they learn from their own peers? How do we do school tours, school visits? How do we make sure that teachers are being enriched, both from a social standpoint, but also from an intellectual standpoint as well? We know that peer mentorship and coaching these are key. We do these even in other professional environments and spaces. How about we also introduce these, and we make sure that we stick to it going forward, and we make sure that teachers are also given these kind of platforms for peer mentorship and coaching. So to recap, I think that this cannot be done only by the government or by the development partners, or I think there's a need for combined efforts, and also looking at where we're putting our resources, and making sure that whatever we're doing is also speaking to not only the students, but we're also speaking to the teachers. How are we improving their welfare? Like I said, how are we ensuring that they're trained both pre-service, in-service, and continuous professional development. How are we ensuring that they're growing career-wise? How are we ensuring that, they're given opportunity to engage with the private sector and peer learning and coaching as well? So I will stop here, and I thank you once again for giving me the platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Honourable Minister, Ms. Claudette Irini, Minister of State in charge of ICT and TVET here at the Ministry of Education in Rwanda. Thank you very much, I think, for drawing our attention to looking at teachers holistically. We've heard a lot of talk about looking at pupils holistically, but I think you've really outlined for us how we look at teachers' needs, both professional and personal, holistically. We're going to move now and do a welcome to the Honourable Minister, Mr. Stanislas Ouaro, Minister of Education, Literacy and the Promotion of National Languages in Burkina Faso. Good morning. Are you with us? And welcome to the plenary.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Il est prévu que le ministre devait intervenir à 12 heures.
Okay. Oui. Bonjour, Minister. I will ask the question in English, but obviously please do use your headsets. In view of Burkina Faso's experience with the Norwegian Teacher Initiative, what policies and coalitions are needed to advocate for innovation at different levels in education systems? And what role could funding agencies, civil society, organizations, and other partners play in promoting, supporting, and sustaining innovation? Thank you. Apologies, colleagues. I don't think we have the minister here yet, so we're going to move forward to our next panelist and hopefully return to him in a few minutes a little later. So now we're going to move right to the other side of the world, actually, to hear from Mr. Iwan Syahril, Director General of Teachers and Education Personnel in Indonesia. He's going to provide some remarks on which policies are needed to foster innovation that supports the SDG objectives of equity, inclusiveness, and quality in education, and how these can be implemented and evaluated. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to address my appreciation to all of us in this policy dialogue forum of strategic thinkers, policymakers, experts, communities, and civil society organizations who have been collaborating with the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030 to promote, support, and invest in the teaching profession. I believe that this forum has been strategically important to create and promote an ecosystem that enables education, research, innovation, and technology stakeholders to work together and to invest in teachers for future universal quality education. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has affected us, our countries, and our teachers in many aspects. As we are fighting to overcome the challenge, we have set in a new journey to learn, unlearn, and relearn. In fact, prior to pandemic, Indonesia has set a new vision for transforming education, which we call Merdeka Belajar, or emancipated learning. It is a philosophy of a student-centered education policy. It is a commitment to put students and their learning first and foremost, which is the basis of all decision-making from all education stakeholders. The global pandemic has taught us a valuable lesson about how quickly circumstances in our lives can change. When COVID-19 became the global pandemic last year, we had little knowledge on how to deal with it. School systems all over the world were put on hold. In fact, 1.6 billion students were affected by the sudden change. All teachers, including the expert ones, had to take baby steps again. Indonesia tried a range of strategies to mitigate the education crisis. We simplified the curriculum so to help teachers to focus on the most essential learning outcomes, so not to burden the students with a mountain of homework that created a lot of stress for students and parents. We created a policy where more than 30 million students and teachers could receive free internet data packages directly to their phones, so they could continue to use online tools and resources. We launched education programs on national television to help students and teachers with no internet access. We provided funding of more than 470 million US dollars to more than 50,000 schools and more than 2 million educators and school staff that were most affected during the pandemic. We created 2 specific initiatives to help teachers deal with teaching and learning difficulties during the pandemic. The first one is called Guru Berbagi, or Teachers Share. It is a crowdsourcing platform where teachers share lesson ideas and materials. In 1 year, the platform has more than 360,000 active users and has been accessed more than 100 million times. Another program is called Guru Belajar, or Teachers Learn. It is an online teacher training platform that has already more than 1 million participants since October last year. Even teachers in far remote islands can join relevant training on this platform. It is about 40% of teachers in the remote areas that have participated in this platform. It has given us hope to Indonesian education that technology can provide solutions to the problem of access to learning and to spark new innovations in teaching. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the new normal has called for quick thinking and being comfortable with the ambiguity. In fact, living in a world of fast-paced change and uncertainties requires adaptability and agility. COVID-19 has pushed all of us to adopt a new mindset, to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. The pandemic has also given us a greater sense of urgency to explore a lot of new possible solutions, to cultivate new ideas and innovations in the effort to reimagine the world. We know better about that than the old normal was not working very well for us. We need a better healthcare system, a better economic system, a better political system, and a better education system for a better humanity for all of us. We are observing in Indonesia, there is a movement of mindset change among teachers. We can see more and more teachers adopting the growth mindset. They're becoming more comfortable with the uncomfortable by embracing uncertainties, accelerating the culture of innovation. They're becoming more and more as lifelong learners because we can see the growth of teacher learning communities everywhere. And with the mindset to problem solve the problems of student learning, and they started to differentiate their instruction and assessment and implement teach at the right level. They become more brave to use the technology. Because the pandemic has forced our teachers to lower their anxiety with the use of technology. So this will accelerate the adoption of technology for innovation in teaching and learning. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we shall recover together from this pandemic, and this 13th Policy Dialogue Forum will be a space for us to reimagine how to rebuild our education system stronger, especially for innovative teacher policy that will strengthen our alliance in this teacher task force. Indonesia welcomes future collaboration from all member states, organizations, and partners for a better access and quality teaching profession that will benefit both the teachers and students and impact not only our future education, but also the future of work. Before closing the remarks, I would like to express my gratitude to the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030 and Republic of Rwanda for bringing us all together today. I'm looking forward to seeing this forum would gather fruitful discussion, insights, and most importantly, collaboration, or as we call it in Indonesia, gotong royong, which is the spirit of collaboration with a sense of empathy and shared responsibility for each other. So we can embark on the journey of recovery from this pandemic and to reimagine and rebuild our system stronger. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. And following this, we will also hear from the Honourable Mr. Jonel Powell, Minister of Education, Youth, Sport and Culture, St. Kitts and Nevis. He will contribute some remarks about what steps need to be taken to enable more innovation and policy making, what actions might be involved and how, and what new sources of expertise are needed that could be drawn upon. Thank you.
Firstly, I wish to extend my appreciation to the Ministry of Education of the Government of Rwanda and the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030 at UNESCO for this invitation to address you at this 13th Policy Dialogue Forum. Secondly, I welcome the presence of my distinguished fellow ministers and look forward to your contributions to this dialogue. The theme, Innovation in Teacher Policy and Practice for Education Recovery, is very much prominent in St. Kitts and Nevis's current work activities, which are in fact progressing as a priority. Fortunately for us, we did not wait until the devastating effects of the COVID pandemic struck us to recognize the need for and to introduce a number of innovative changes aimed at improving the country's education system to upgrade the quality of teacher training and undertake the professionalization of our cherished teaching force. The government of St. Kitts and Nevis is in the final stages of implementing its education sector strategy 2017 to 2021 on the heels of the UNESCO review of the country's education policy back in 2016. The outcome of that review was an innovative development as the first ever independent and rigorous reviewing in the Caribbean of a government's education policy, and more importantly, kickstarting the equally innovative policy changes. Key priorities identified with UNESCO's assistance focus mainly on improving the quality of education, although there is still an urgent need to address school infrastructure. Other sector priorities included strengthening curriculum relevance and workforce preparation, expanding access to quality education for sustainable development services and tertiary education, enhancing teacher effectiveness, professionalization of the teaching force, and establishing a comprehensive student support service framework for at-risk learners. So, in terms of the SDG 4 goal, ensuring that all girls and boys complete free primary and secondary schooling by 2030, this aspect is already central to St. Kitts and Nevis's education policy, while equal access to affordable vocational training remains a challenge. I should also underscore here that while the COVID-19 pandemic triggered widespread closures for schools and disruption of education systems across the islands, St. Kitts and Nevis lost few days of school tuition during this period. Now, at this stage, you might expect me to extol the virtues of information and communication technologies, ICTs, as a central pillar of our innovative plans for education recovery. But small island developing states face a different range of ICT challenges. While ICT arrangements replacing face-to-face learning were adopted by most Caribbean governments to support online distance learning, the results may have been, frankly, mixed. Part of the reason was that online learning modalities are inaccessible to many children in our sub-region, notably children from poor and rural households. As a result of inequitable access to the internet that enables online learning techniques, not to mention the lack of development opportunities in online teaching for teachers, many children lost nearly a year of formal instruction. What this pandemic phenomenon demonstrated to us was firstly, the heightened risk of pre-existing shortcomings in cultivating a teacher professionalization strategy. Secondly, and as I stressed in our national statement at the 41st UNESCO General Conference, despite laudable attempts to digitalize the learning process, it cannot be a substitute for the pedagogical knowledge and skills imparted by the teacher. This is the basis for all quality education, regardless of how it is delivered. Thus, going forward, central to the St. Kitts and Nevis government's education strategy will be the building of innovation in teacher policy and practices to attain quality education for all through a structured policy of professionalization of the teaching community. Thanks to the technical assistance input from UNESCO's Task Force on Teachers for Education, St. Kitts and Nevis has embarked on the fundamental scaling up of the professionalization of our teaching community to address the new challenges, accentuated by the pandemic, but, as already mentioned, which were pre-existing. We've got to put these fundamental teacher professionalization principles, standards, and procedures in place now. We cannot wait to react to a climate situation or another pandemic due to viral infection to strike. Secondly, we are innovative in St. Kitts and Nevis by establishing a national teaching council to regulate the teaching profession in accordance with international best practices. This will include professional registration of teachers, control of standards, and an enforcement of a code of professional conduct. In time, this framework will put in place a professional licensing and registration as a quality assurance measure linked to teacher appraisal. The next immediate steps, with guidance again from UNESCO, will be operationalizing the functions of the National Teaching Council to include, among others, determination, implementation, and periodic review of national teaching standards, determination, implementation, and periodic review of school leadership standards, implementation of the teacher career path, fixing a national minimum teaching qualification, categorization of teachers, establishment and regular updating of teachers' register, registration and licensing of teachers and school leaders, administration of teacher licensure tests, and induction of registered teachers. This will also call for innovative recruitment policies to be developed. Here, we will perhaps need to go beyond the one-size-fits-all approach, not always adapted by the cultural and small pool of teaching talent of small island developing states like ours. We will review the potential adoption of successful innovative policies used by, for instance, Singapore, another small island developing state, which has a compelling model for a comprehensive recruitment process. The selection is based on the candidate's performance in 4 components: initial screening of academic qualifications, a literacy assessment, an interview, and a continuous professional development program. Not to be forgotten, in the optimization of the professionalization of the Federation's teaching force is our thrust to accompany the teachers in their development by preparing them through meaningful training and mentored experience, and supporting teachers to improve instruction to include online tuition. Ultimately, as the Minister of Education, I put a strong emphasis on the now well-established prognosis associated with quality education for all, that proper training and motivation of teachers has a direct impact on students' learning outcomes and well-being, and that teacher quality is the single most important in-school factor linked to student achievement. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. I hope now that we are being joined by the Minister from Burkina Faso. Welcome to the Honourable Mr. Stanislas Ouaro. Minister, are you with us? Okay. If not, we will move on and hope that we can do the connection a little bit later. So I'd now like to welcome Miss Lucy Crehan, teacher, author of Cleverlands. Welcome, Lucy. I hope you can hear me and you're with us.
I am. Hello.
Hello. Great.
Hello. Thank you.
Lucy, a question I would like to ask you is, how should we design teacher policies to encourage a culture of innovation across the education ecosystem? And how can systems identify and encourage the scaling of effective local innovations? Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I'm so honoured to be invited here and to be speaking alongside such distinguished panelists. So thank you very much for the invitation. Now, I believe, based on my research in high-performing systems in particular, that a culture of innovation for teachers comes when they feel that they have a sense of purpose and a sense of agency. And from what I've seen in various countries, that this is achieved by teacher policies that is a combination of tight, loose, and tight. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So the first sense in which there's some policy that does need to be tight is being clear about what it is that we are expecting teachers to achieve. So what is the curriculum in its broadest sense? What are we tasking teachers to do? What should students understand? How should they behave? What should they be able to do by the time they leave school? So big picture things, but also it needs to be focused. Teachers need to understand what content or core concepts is it that they need to pass on to students? What kind of competencies do they need to develop in students? So to be very clear about what needs to be achieved. And to not have a curriculum that is overly full, so that it's actually something which is achievable. And that provides a sense of purpose for the system, a sense of purpose for the teachers, and it also gives teachers the time to think about and focus on the how, and to share ideas with colleagues and to innovate around the how to teach and how to engage the students, rather than trying to decide on what to teach or all trying to teach different things. And this has been a challenge in some countries following global trends around very high level curricula, where a lot of the decision making is left up to teachers. And it can lead to a situation where, rather than being innovative, teachers fall back on what they've always done, because actually the amount of decision making there and the workload associated with it is just too great. So that's one sense in which I think policy needs to be tight to encourage innovation, is teachers knowing what it is that they are tasked to do. Another area which I think needs to be tight is around the training and the support that teachers have. So this relates to what the minister from Rwanda said earlier. We need to give teachers the tools to do their job well. They need to have the knowledge, the increasing body of knowledge that exists out there that teachers should best make use of. So things such as new research on cognitive science, in terms of the science of memory, for example, pedagogical content knowledge, by which I mean things such as, if I'm a maths teacher, the knowledge of what are student common misconceptions when it comes to adding fractions. This knowledge does exist out there in the world. And the more that we can get more teachers to access that knowledge that is out there, the more empowered they will feel to actually use that professional knowledge base to do their jobs as we have tasked them to do in terms of that clear curriculum. So part of that is about training, is about initial teacher education, and several of the ministers spoke today about how important that is and the various policies they're putting in place for that. But for the right now, for those teachers who did their initial teacher education many years ago and perhaps aren't as skilled up or clued up on what's happened more recently in terms of research on cognitive science, for example, we can support them with high quality materials, such as teacher guides. So rather than just having textbooks, if you have teacher guides which include this knowledge, so for example, here we've opened our teacher guide on the page about rivers. Here are some common misconceptions that students have about river formation, for example, or what are some really great questions we can ask students about gravity to really get them thinking deeply. And they can have that knowledge in front of them on their desk. And this is where the innovation becomes possible. When teachers know what it is that we're trying to achieve, what it is that we need to get students to understand or be able to do, and they feel empowered by having the knowledge that exists for their profession that is best going to support them to do that. But there is a big space there still. There is a big space, which is where the innovation comes in. This is the loose, which is letting teachers then use this knowledge to respond to the children in their context as they see fit, removing regulations around what teachers do in the classrooms, so long as they are evaluating the impact of what they're doing and they're checking that what they're doing is having a positive impact. So I think that's the tight, loose, tight that creates a space for teachers to feel empowered to innovate. The second part of the question was around how we can scale promising innovations. How do we know which innovations are going to be effective and how we can scale those up? And I'm going to focus on pedagogical innovations in teaching. And I believe, and I have seen in various countries, that this works well when it is done through networks of teachers as professionals. As the minister who just spoke from St Kitts and Nevis highlighted the importance of professionalizing the teaching workforce, I don't think there's a shortcut to teacher professionalization. We've got to create systems, as other professions have, where if you have a fantastic idea or innovation as a teacher, there are teacher conferences at which you will present your idea to other professionals. Those other professionals can then try that in their contexts. As a collective in that conference, teachers consider, do we have an understanding of why this might work? How does this fit in with the existing teacher knowledge that we have? And then ultimately, it will be universities who make decisions about what is the valuable knowledge which will be taught in initial teacher education again. And just to give you a couple of examples of those teacher networks, a very formal one is in Shanghai, where teachers have networks across schools, where there is time within their timetable, perhaps every month, to go and meet with teachers who teach the same subject or the same year group. And one teacher will perhaps give a demonstration lesson, and then they will all discuss a particular pedagogical technique. So that's one structure for sharing these innovations. Another less formal is one that has emerged in the UK, where I'm from, called Research Ed, which actually was started on Twitter. As you know, we kicked off this plenary with talk of the potential for innovation that comes from this modern technology. And Research Ed is a movement of teachers who met each other on Twitter and has exploded across the world. Teachers who are interested in the research that can support teaching practice, and who are trying in their classrooms to apply that research in their lessons, and are then meeting to discuss that in conferences and sharing what has worked for them and what hasn't. So there's just one formal and one less formal way of sharing that knowledge around the system. So I think that's quite enough from me. I hope that's been helpful. And thank you very much once again for the invitation to participate in such an important event.
Thank you very much for those very insightful comments. I'd now like to welcome Mr. Dennis Signolo, from Education International. Welcome, Dennis. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm online. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you well. Thank you very much. Dennis, I'd like to ask you, what is the potential role of teachers and their representatives in contributing to policy making that supports teacher agency and autonomy? And how can countries capitalize on these efforts towards a more inclusive policy-making process in the future? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the Teacher Task Force, UNESCO, and the government of Rwanda for inviting Education International to participate in this important panel discussion. As some of you may know, Education International is the global organization of teachers with a membership of over 32 million educators from early childhood to university in 178 countries. Coming back to your question, it's vitally important that governments primarily involve teachers and their unions in the education policy-making process. Why is that so? Because as we have heard again and again, teachers are pedagogical experts. They are leaders in their own right. So it's vitally important that we empower them, we support them to exercise their leadership, to take initiative, to create and innovate. Teachers cannot innovate or create or solve problems if they are working in an environment that is characterized by control or lack of trust. So it's vitally important that we democratize our education systems, and that also includes the school itself. That's why it's important to train our leaders, our school leaders, our head teachers, so that democracy is practiced in the school. And our teachers, of course, should make sure they practice democracy in their classrooms. So that's what creates an atmosphere of creativity and innovation. In other words, I'm talking about the primary importance of democracy in the school and democracy in the education system, of course, but also teacher professional autonomy. So teachers have that expertise and that potential to actually drive successful education policies only if they can be given room to do that. And then the second important point I want to stress is that teachers are found in our classrooms, in our communities, even the most remote of them all, the remotest of them all. So what does that mean? That means they can bring the reality of the classroom into the education policy-making process. Sometimes policymakers are driven or advised by experts who may not have been in the classroom, or maybe they were in the classroom some years back. Or sometimes the policies are defined by people who are in administration who have not been in the classroom for many years. So that's why it's important that we allow teachers to input into the policymaking process so that they can actually bring that reality to bear when we come up with policies. That way our policies will be effective and certainly relevant. The third point I want to emphasize is that, in fact, teachers and their unions have done a number of things that support education policy development and certainly the improvement of teaching and learning in various countries. I'll give you examples from EI, my organization. We've developed tools, for example. We developed together with the UNESCO an important tool, which is the EI UNESCO Global Framework of Professional Teaching Standards. I had the Honorable Minister from St. Kitts and Nevis talking about the primary importance of standards. Absolutely. But it's important that those standards be developed by teachers and with teachers, not for them, not imposed on them. That way they'll be relevant and they'll work. We have also developed, as Education International in Africa, a framework on hybrid teaching and learning. This is meant to guide teachers, of course, and our partners, policymakers, and so on, from the teacher's perspective, coming from the teachers, how we can frame policies around virtual teaching and learning, hybrid teaching and learning. We are currently working on another framework on social dialogue in Africa, and hopefully we will have it finalized in the coming year. The other important point I want to stress, which is point number 4, is that actually teachers and their unions bring evidence, research evidence, to the policy making table. We do a lot of research in EI, teacher unions do a lot of research actually. So that research can help to improve, edify our policies. We launched in October EI's global survey on the status of teachers in the teaching profession. This is a triennial survey. So there's a big report that we launched and it's available on our website. It tells you what's going on in terms of the status of teachers currently within the context of COVID-19. And the 5th point I want to stress is that teachers, particularly through their unions, undertake a lot of capacity building activities. I'll cite 2 examples. For example, in Tanzania, we've teamed up with the Open University of Tanzania, with the teacher union there, with the government in Tanzania to train early childhood educators. So we've trained so far more than 400 early childhood educators who have just graduated from the university. So this is an initiative of teachers themselves through their union. The second example is the book writing project we are running in different countries, Benin, Burundi, Burkina Faso, the Gambia, Tanzania, and others, where we bring teachers together and train them how to write readers' books for their children. I can tell you it's a miracle because these teachers are able to write relevant materials which talk about their environment, and children enjoy reading about the places they know instead of getting readers from outside the country. It's working, it's teacher empowerment. I just want to end by saying this, moderator. No education or teacher policy reform can succeed without the full involvement and support of teachers and their unions. It is therefore of paramount importance that governments involve educators and their unions in the conceptualization, development, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of education policies. I emphasize that let's involve them right from the beginning, even trying to understand what the problem is, coming up with policy options. Quite often you hear some people saying, oh, teachers are implementers. Yes, we are, but not exclusively. So we should be involved right from the beginning and throughout the policy making process. As we have heard from the Honorable Minister of Rwanda, it is vitally important that we provide training, induction, continuous professional development and support to teachers. And it's of paramount importance that teachers get decent salaries and working conditions. I want to end by saying this, and this is very important. Let's improve teachers' working conditions. Let's support them to thrive and to succeed in the classroom. By improving their working conditions, we're improving children's learning conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those insightful comments from Mr. Dennis Sinolo from Education International. And that brings to an end the contributions from our panelists. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to make the connection to Burkina Faso. So I'd now like to open the session to questions from the audience and from online. And as you've been very patiently sitting here listening, I'd really like to go to a question from the audience first. Could you indicate, and we will bring you a mic if you'd like to ask a question. Yes, but could we have a mic for our colleague at the front? Yeah, you need. I think you need a mic so that then the colleagues online can hear it. So thank you very much. Perhaps if you could just say who you are and where you're from to start with, that would be great. Thank you.
Good day to everyone who are present here today. This is Roxana Bilkis from Bangladesh. I would like to say 2 points which is related to innovation in policy. In the morning session, Daniel addressed this one issue, positive attitude. The positive attitude always creates the positive resonance. On the other hand, negative attitude always create the negative resonance. So we should consider what we have instead of what we don't have. I would like to address the next point, using digital device. Frequently, our teachers use it, our students use it, but there is a demerit that they are addicted in virtual virus. I think it is a challenge for educational recovery. The journey of success for 100,000 miles starts a single steps, which is one steps lead to the next. If we walk on the way, if we see the hole, then we can change, and beside the hole we can walk. And I think this one is a very dangerous. I think it is a very limitation and drawbacks in our education system. What we are doing here in my country, I saw that teachers and students are addicted in virtual virus. And today, our chief guests address these points a little bit. Now, I'd like to address this virtual virus through TTF. We can make a research. Based on this research, we can make a policy, then planning, program, project. Our genuine attention to teachers will help them win a place of their hand, of their heart, of their soul. Thank you all. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Ma'am. So you would like the panelists maybe to comment on your point about virtual
virus addiction, because I am the director researcher and documentation in our country, and there is a research that they are habituated to do the online teaching, e-learning, but on the other hand, there is a negative effect. That's why I'm telling this area. Okay.
Sure. Thank you very much. Honourable Minister, could I invite you perhaps to comment first? Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for raising that. I think, and I totally agree, if we are moving to the digital or to the hybrid or virtual teaching and learning, then we should be equipped enough to not fall into the trap, what you're calling a virtual virus, I think. It is important that when we are training, and again, I emphasize on the training part, because if the teachers are not well equipped and well trained to be able to not fall into that trap, then definitely if they're teaching using the tools, then the students are also going to fall into that trap. So it is very important that that aspect is looked at. Two, I think there are a few things that we always forget. These technologies do not control themselves. We control them. You know, I remember when we were in lockdown and parents raising the same questions, we told them, you know, the computers have what you call parental controls, but no one seems to know that these do actually exist. That if you open a window or a session, let's call it a session, you can always put boundaries around your student or your child to make sure that they do not fall into these traps. But again, I emphasize on the training, because people will not know about these controls if they're not trained on how to use them. But then you also ended on a recommendation. You know, you submitted a recommendation to the teacher task force and say, let's do research so that we decide better based on facts, on the research, to make sure that that virtual virus does not become a hindrance in our digital teaching and learning. And I do support that as well. It is important that we look at what are the effects, what are the consequences, and what should we do before we get into that direction and we cannot go back. But thank you so much for raising that. I think it is very important.
Thank you very much for that very helpful response. I'd just like to ask the panelists that we have online whether you have any short input you'd like to make to that question about the virtual virus. Mr. Dennis Sinolo, would you like to respond quickly?
Yes, thank you very much. That's an important point. In fact, it's important that when we use technology, we also regulate its use, particularly in our education systems. And that's the role, of course, of UNESCO, the Teacher Task Force, and others. Looking, for example, at the new UNESCO instrument on the ethical use of artificial intelligence. I mean, that's a welcome regulatory mechanism. So it's important that we do that and we take care of issues like cyberbullying, attacks, and so on. There have been embarrassing incidents. Sometimes lessons have been hacked and hackers have projected inappropriate material in front of the students. It's also important to stress the lack of digital skills, but also digital infrastructure. It's a big challenge we are seeing from our research. So while it might be working, technology might be working in certain countries, certainly in Africa and other places, there's a big digital divide. And finally, the teacher workload has increased tremendously as a result of online teaching and learning, and we need to address this. We cannot avoid it. Yes, certainly a study would help, but after analyzing all the data that we have, it's clear that the most effective way of teaching and learning is in person and in school teaching and learning. Online teaching is complementary. Sometimes we tend to exaggerate the importance of online teaching and learning. Look at even developed countries, whether in Europe or elsewhere, they had to reopen schools because it didn't really work. Thank you.
Thank you very much from Mr. Dennis Cedillo from Education International. And just finally to close, I wanted to, Lucy Crehan, if you had just a 1 minute remark to finish this, as I realize we're running over time.
Hello. 1 minute remark, gosh.
Just addressing virtual virus.
Sorry?
Addressing the issue of the virtual virus.
I'm not sure I'm qualified to comment on that. My background is not in the technological side, and I feel it's also very important in my role to say when I'm not an expert in the area, rather than just saying something making something else. So my apologies that, but just thank you very much for the invitation to be involved. It's been a fascinating discussion.
Great, thank you very much. I think that raises very interesting questions about the balance of kind of hybrid learning, blended learning and so on, and when we use these ICT tools. So thank you very much for that great question. And to finish now, just very big thanks to all our panelists for coming here today and joining us online for the discussion here about innovation in education policy. So perhaps you can join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much. And a quick reminder that it is now lunchtime and we have the lunch break, which is until 2 o'clock Rwanda time. And then at 2 o'clock, there will be 4 exciting breakout sessions, either in here or in the meeting rooms downstairs. So we look forward to welcoming you to those breakout sessions at 2 p.m. Thank you.